A film adaptation of the Xbox classic Halo has been a dream for fans of the game for a long time. I often remember thinking upon completion of Combat Evolved back in 2001 that the game's premise so clearly mirrored that of 1980s action flicks such as Die Hard, Aliens, Predator, etc. that the developers were clearly inspired by similar works. So it would come as a surprise to absolutely no one that over the past 2 decades there have been repeated attempts to bring the series to the big screen. These previous attempts at a live-action adaptation of Halo are no secret, and it unfortunately has had a long and complicated history. But eventually, a concept for a serialized TV series that was bouncing around studios since about 2014 was finally picked up by Showtime in 2018, eventually to be released in 2022 on the streaming service Paramount+. Its ratings have been, mixed to say the least. And this breakdown is by no means meant to be a full-on praising of the show so far. I admit it has its issues. But with the abundance of loud and repetitive rants and endless analysis videos beating what many hope to one day be an actual dead horse, I wanted to throw in my 2 cents aimed primarily at cutting through the static and to address what I find to be pretty unsubstantiated and minor criticisms of what we have seen so far. This is, for what it's worth, a defense of the Halo TV series. Greetings Spacefarers, I'm Michael and welcome to MTJ Disorder, a place where I like to rant, muse and debate various topics surrounding my many passions. If you're into science fiction gaming and other action adventures, then go ahead and subscribe and like this video for more. For the record, there is an initial bias from me here in that I do actually enjoy this show. It is by no means perfect, and on average, each of the 9 Season 1 episodes range from cringy and annoying and mediocre and uninspired, to the occasional absolute thrill ride and even full-on emotional and impactful. As the saying goes, the truth likely lies somewhere in the middle, but I am not a professional critic and I can only speak on what I think and feel. But the first season, from my perspective, was okay. And yes, after years of history across many games, books and other adaptations, okay is not exactly hitting the ground running. However, as a fan of Star Trek, I have to honestly say I am no stranger to just okay starts to TV series, and also I'm not ashamed to admit heaping bowls full of cringe.
Look out!
Let's fly.
But this isn't Star Trek, and I shouldn't be comparing the two. I just wanted to add context to where I'm coming from when it comes to justifying the mediocrity of the Halo series thus far. It's my observation that many of the self-proclaimed critics on social media these days cannot accept a piece of media if it isn't by their individual standards perfect. And that's not to say these naysayers don't have a decent understanding of objectivity. Simply put, as with many things in recent years, there is an undeniable all-or-nothing mentality, which makes achieving success the forbidden fruit of film and television in the 21st century. It's also kind of an unfortunate byproduct of serialized television. Going back to the Star Trek example, if you have one disastrously bad episode, it's not the end of the world, as it was always possible to follow that up with a critically acclaimed episode the following week. It's the main reason I think that the standard battle cry of critics of Halo is "everyone hates this," despite not being 100% true. There are proponents of even the worst films and TV series. But when it comes down to it, if there isn't enough good to outweigh the bad, then the what should be a subset of the audience that are fine with it will often lean more towards being disappointed with it, adding conviction to the arguments of those who ultimately hate it. And just to be clear, this is all valid. I just find it really frustrating to see so many intellectual properties go down in flames these days before they're given a fair run. I'll be the first one to express my displeasure if this upcoming season continues to be mediocre or, God forbid, gets worse. I mean, come on, that sequence where the Chief slams a Banshee into a Phantom was pretty fucking awesome. If we can keep getting more of that, and more of this, then I'll be happy. Why in the holy realms of flying fuck won't the Master Chief keep his fucking helmet on? I'm just kidding, I really do not care. Of all the criticisms levied against this show so far, I find this to be the most contentious, and for all the wrong reasons. In a nutshell, and I'm likely paraphrasing, it usually goes like this. Why can't he keep his helmet on? It makes no sense for him to always remove his helmet. The Mandalorian doesn't take his helmet off his face to connect. We don't need to see his face for him to take his helmet off. We don't need to see his face. For the love of God, why can't he keep his helmet on? You get the idea. If I ever engage with anyone openly about why I don't care about whether the Master Chief has his helmet on or not, I'm usually painted as a complete moron who couldn't possibly be a fan of Halo, and I just don't understand the character. Which is absurd. When I was 14, Combat Evolved was released on the original Xbox, and it was all I ever wanted to experience after seeing the TV spots, so much so that my parents weren't willing to buy it for me due to its mature content, so I made a deal with my brother in secret to rent it for me from Blockbuster under the guise that he was actually renting Crimson Skies, which, don't get me wrong, is a great game, but all I wanted to play was Halo. I started it that night around 8 PM, pretended to be in bed at 10 PM, and continued after my family had all gone to sleep and proceeded to play all the way until sunrise without skipping a beat. My worldview was shaken by this game. As a millennial teenager, I didn't know what I had just experienced. I wasn't even tired after being awake all night. I just wanted to talk to someone about it. Now, 23 years later, I'm here, still just as avid about Halo as a series as I was back then when it was just one game. Being called a fake fan, because I don't care that the Master Chief is taking his helmet off. Let's just stick with the main complaint that the Chief never takes his helmet off for a second, ignoring the fact that in the extended canon he does it all the time. Even in the time frame of Combat Evolved in the novel The Flood, he not only takes his helmet off, he gets completely butt naked to take a well-earned shower at the UNSC's FOB. And also completely glossing over the pure illogical stance that any human soldier would live without occasionally removing their helmet, let's just take a look at the long-standing history of the Master Chief not removing his helmet. Oh, there he removes his helmet. Oh, and this one he doesn't even have his helmet on yet. Nope, now he's put it on. Okay, so far we're into Halo 3 and there is no helmet removing shenanigans. Thumbs up. Ah, here we are, Halo 4. This time he's removing his entire armor. Oh! And what's that? We actually see his eyes this time? Hang on a second, isn't one of the major themes of this game's story how the Chief needs to realize he's not a machine? And that's when it dawned on me. People are not actually mad about him removing his helmet. People are mad about seeing his face. The common denominator in all of those examples I cited is that he's removing his helmet, but we never quite get a glimpse at what he looks like. So that's the standard that the average fan sets upon any visual adaptation. I say visual adaptation because books, comics, whatever, you don't see what his face looks like, it is only described to you, which makes it easier to digest, I would imagine. But in that moment where Pablo Schreiber's John 117 reveals his face, it was a bold declaration to not just the Halo fandom, but the entire gaming world, that this is the face of the Master Chief. A huge crucible for mass disappointment. And disappointed many were. It's clear now, based off of the criticisms from so many. Pablo always had big shoes to fill, or should I say, a big helmet to fill. But you see, this isn't what I often hear or read when people object to all of the helmet removal. Yes, there are likely many of you out there who are honest with yourself and not happy with the casting, and there will also likely be an equal amount of you who stand by the wish that the Master Chief just remains a faceless automaton, because that's what you know. The retort, however, that I don't quite agree with is actually one that Pablo and the developers haven't really done themselves any favors with by coming out and addressing it, and that's this idea that you need to see his face in order to connect emotionally with his character. But in return, I also specifically disagree with the frequently parroted idea that if the Mandalorian can do it, so can the Master Chief. Both sides to this argument are true in many ways, but in regards to whether or not the Master Chief should be or shouldn't be wearing his helmet, it's bullshit. On one hand, yes, the Master Chief is a character who is meant to struggle with his humanity and, for long periods of his life, has only ever known the Spartan program, and for all intents and purposes, that helmet has become his face. But, on the other hand, the Master Chief is not a warrior zealot bounty hunter whose entire philosophy and societal status among his peers rests solely on whether or not he removes his helmet. There's not actually an in-universe reason for us to ever presume that John 117 should and never would remove his helmet. In fact, there's a case for him to do so more frequently in the show than he does in the games because, in the show, we are actually seeing him during periods of downtime. But the original trilogy of games takes place in just a matter of months, when our player character is in constant conflict. I guess what I'm saying is stop comparing apples to oranges, and likewise Pablo needs to stop speaking out and justifying it all the time. I understand the need to defend your position, but trying to argue with passionate fans is an act of futility. There's those who care, and there's those who don't. Nothing will change that. Just concentrate on making a good adaptation and it should speak for itself. Speaking of that, Perhaps one of the most frustrating aspects of the world of social media and the consistent and unadulterated access to information we have these days is how everyone just assumes they're experts at just about anything. And yes, the hypocrisy of me challenging this in a video I scripted and produced myself isn't lost on me.
You fucking hypocrite.
But hear me out. I have no delusions on whether I am right or wrong on any of what I have said or will say. I just like to think about it. As much as I hate the cliche, it is just my opinion. With that being said, it seems everyone sees themselves as expert critics these days. Instead of just having an opinion and standing by it, we're constantly getting caught up in debates about what our opinion is and why we have it, to the point where we have lost track of what is and isn't subjective. You see, opinions are like assholes. If you don't wipe them thoroughly, they smell like shit, and in the end you... Wait, what? Sorry. That's not the saying. Okay, what I meant to say was, opinions matter, but not in the way you may think. When The Last Jedi was released to possibly the most polarizing reception to any piece of media to date, it had this uncanny effect of sending Disney into a downward spiral of course correction and panic. And it left the average moviegoer feeling like they were powerful and their opinions held sway. I legit have had conversations with friends and strangers alike who to this day think that their hatred of that film got Colin Trevorrow fired from Episode 9, and that their voice actually contributed to more well-received Star Wars content being produced in the future. The reality is it didn't. Film studios only really care about one thing: money. The backlash from the loud detractors of The Last Jedi wasn't truly felt until the failure of Solo, which did not fare well at the box office. It was only then that Lucasfilm started to make their knee-jerk reactions and attempted to implement damage control. Just how much this audience feedback had the power to incite positive change is up for debate. You can see other examples of this all over the industry, such as with the Sonic the Hedgehog trailer, but the fact of the matter is this: all the uproar, the outrage, the feedback, all that really does is create the illusion that your opinions are helping elicit positive change. With Sonic the Hedgehog, it succeeded. The CGI went from absolute nightmare-inducing garbage to actually being really good. But with Star Wars, depending on who you ask, the opposite happened. For all its flaws, The Last Jedi was an earnest attempt from a director to try something different. The Rise of Skywalker, however, is it really even a movie? I'm sure it has its fans, but I don't remember the last time I saw a ranking where it wasn't listed at the bottom of the pile. In the end, the ones who truly care about the art they are crafting are merely employees of the studios who provide the means to make it. If the work isn't bringing in the cash, then those employees are removed. That's where the consumer's power truly lies. So what has this to do with the Halo series? Well, there's a lot of assumptions and opinions surrounding the Halo series that many believe to be outright facts. Some are accurate, but some are nothing more than hearsay or misinterpretations. But nothing is more misunderstood than this belief that the showrunners refuse to play the games and don't care about making a lore-accurate show. As though these writers and directors are some kind of wolf in sheep's clothing. The quote that is often misrepresented is this one from then showrunner Stephen Kane. "We didn't look at the game. We didn't talk about the game. We talked about the characters and the world, so I never felt limited by it being a game." At face value, this is a declaration that he doesn't care about the video games, and yes, this was a major misstep from Kane, but if you stop and think about it for a second, is that really what he was trying to communicate? The Halo series should have always been about adapting the games first and foremost, and the extended world secondary, but this quote isn't and should not be scrutinized as the showrunners absolutely refusing to work with the games as the primary source material. It's just not what they're saying. I mean, look at this. This is Halo. My takeaway is this: the Season 1 showrunners of Halo wanted to create a sprawling TV show akin to something like The Expanse. They clearly were mandated with crafting something that would last for several seasons and possibly a spin-off. Choosing to blow their load instantly by starting Episode 1 with the Pillar of Autumn blind jumping to Installation 4 was never in the playbook. It only becomes more evident as you watch the series that their interest was more about adapting the world and characters than it was the story of the first game. The primary players are all there: Chief, Jacob and Miranda Keyes, Dr. Halsey, Lord Hood, Cortana, the list goes on. Even if we just accept the premise that all these characters are portrayed and adapted poorly, the fact still remains they are there. The writers had to have known about them before, writing about them. We have all the races of the Covenant. The Prophets of Mercy and Truth have speaking roles, locations such as Reach, High Charity, Eridanus 2. I think it's safe to say that Stephen Kane wasn't saying they were ignoring the games, they were just prioritizing, as he said, the world and the characters. As for whether it was the correct choice, well, as with the previous examples, your voices were heard, and now Stephen Kane is no longer involved, and we have new showrunners who claim to be more interested in bringing the plots together. The only question remains is, what kind of results can we expect? Sonic the Hedgehog, or The Rise of Skywalker? Oddly enough, when someone tries to defend this show, I often hear it said that it's okay, it's a different timeline, it's not canon, as though that somehow excuses anything from being shit. There's a lot of apologetics that goes on in the name of defending adaptations of stories from different mediums that really shouldn't matter, it never did in the past. I mean, when has a film or movie adaptation ever been considered canon? I never heard anyone complain about the Lord of the Rings movies back when they were released, despite the fact they are chocked full of canon violations and inaccuracies, way more than the Halo TV series. And it's because this idea of differing timelines is only something that people give a shit about now because of the overabundance of multiversal thematics currently in pop culture. John 117, or Master Cheeks as people often like to call him, is no more an alternate timeline variant of his video game counterpart than Elijah Wood's Frodo Baggins is. In those movies, the main characters are so vastly different from their book counterparts that there really is an argument to be made that they might as well be completely different characters altogether. It's no different when it comes to plot threads and character motivations either. There is so much about the Lord of the Rings films that not only deviates but detracts from the themes of Tolkien's books that I could make an entire video on just that alone. So why do we forgive Peter Jackson and company for making those changes? It's simple, because it was an acceptable deviation required to tell a more streamlined and narratively compelling story within the constraints of 9 hours of runtime. They even say as much in the hours and hours of bonus features on the Blu-ray release of those films, and the end result, no matter how accurate, is outstanding. Contrast that with the shallow cash grab abomination that is the Rings of Power, and you start to really understand what it is that truly makes a good adaptation: an appreciation for the source material and talent. That's it. A lot of those with anger towards the Halo TV series most likely begin with the perceived lack of care and attention shown towards the IP. It is undeniably a weakness, but as discussed, not completely true. But it is, for most people, a really difficult hurdle to leap. I, for one, find that this show is at its best when it focuses on the Master Chief, Cortana, and the Covenant War. Oddly enough, elements that the original trilogy of games are mostly focused on. Where this show starts to lose me is when it ventures too much into dealing with the insurrectionist UNSC conflict. It really is an icky subject matter that even Bungie were self-aware enough to realise needed to be left in the world-building department. The Halsey Spartan program plotline I also enjoy, but does need to be more subdued. As long as it remains part of the world building and not a focal point of the main drama, it's fine. And lastly, though I don't mind our boy Master Chief losing his virginity, I think it's something we can all agree on, he needs to keep it in his pants moving forward. It is my hope that as the show progresses, it starts to find its way toward culminating with the main themes of Halo. A flawed and ruthless spacefaring society struggling against annihilation in the backdrop of an ancient fallen civilization. With a badass super soldier we not only love, but empathize with leading the way. I said at the end of Season 1 that it was my guess that the purpose of all the deviations from the game were aimed at establishing a world that those who had never played the games before could relate to. This is still quite evident, and at that point I thought it was brilliant, knowing full well that somewhere along the line, the fall of Reach would occur and all the pieces would begin to fall into place. My initial assumption was that we would be well into Season 3 before that happened, but because of the reception and criticisms, major course correction has occurred, and it is now the major set piece of Season 2. In summary, this show hasn't been amazing by any stretch of the imagination, but it really hasn't been that bad either. I just think it's about time we start to give things more of a chance rather than immediately setting out to burn it all down because it isn't quite what we wanted. You hear it from just about every major detractor. This isn't what I wanted in a Halo series. That is completely fair enough, it's not really what I wanted either, but all forms of art are ultimately about expression and finding new and abstract ways to convey ideas and emotions, otherwise you're just copying and pasting. HBO's The Last of Us was really good, but not because of the tit-for-tat retelling of the game's story. In fact, I thought that was where it dragged a little. That show excelled when it tried to forge its own interpretations. In the end, it isn't really that big of a deal if this show is good or not. Yet another cliche I hate, but you can't escape its wisdom, is this: you can always go back and play the games. And you never know, if you give something a chance, it might not be what you wanted, but you just might like it anyway. Thanks for watching. With Season 2 off to a better start, I'd love to know what do you guys think so far. I'll likely give my thoughts somewhere as we move forward, but let me know in the comment section below. Be sure to hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't already, and hit the bell notification icon to be informed of future videos. Keep us alive, my friends, and until next time,
I should go.